How do you react when your own family abandons you and your child in the forest, then tells the world you're the unstable one? How do you stay calm when you realize the people who raised you are trying to take your daughter away by turning survival into a story about your unfitness? This is how I went from the quiet, weak dad everyone pushed around to the man who watched them face a judge with their own words and signatures in front of them. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Alex, and the weekend that broke my family started with a trunk full of camping gear and my daughter humming along to the radio. The drive up to the forest was the part I always liked. The town slowly fell away, then the billboards, then the last gas station. The trees got taller and denser, and the road turned into long curves instead of stoplights. Mia sat in the back seat with her headphones around her neck, telling me facts about birds she had read in a book. I answered when she asked something, but mostly I just listened to her voice and the tires on the road. This trip was supposed to be simple. One big family weekend. My parents, my younger brother Kevin and his wife Laura and their kids, me and Mia. 2 nights at a group campsite. Some hiking, some cooking over a fire, maybe a little quiet time with just the 2 of us on a trail. I wanted to show my parents again that I was fine, that I could take care of my daughter, that we were not fragile. When we turned into the campground road, I already saw Kevin's bright SUV ahead of us, silver paint shining like a mirror in the sun. My own old sedan looked dull in the reflection when we pulled up behind him at the check-in booth. He was already out of his car, talking to the ranger with that easy, confident body language he had learned from years of meetings. By the time we reached the group site, the show had started. Kevin backed his SUV into the perfect spot, opened the hatch, and pulled out brand new tents that still smelled like plastic. Laura stood nearby in her expensive hiking jacket, taking photos with her phone. My parents turned their heads and watched as Kevin unfolded chairs and a big portable grill. I parked a little farther away, where the ground was flat enough for my old car not to scrape. Mia helped me pull out our gear. Our tent was older but still good. Our cooler was smaller. Our steel pot had scratches. My mother glanced over and told Mia that it was nice she was used to simple things, and that not every child could handle roughing it. She said it with a smile, but I knew what she meant. I had heard the same tone many times. We carried our things to the picnic table. Kevin clapped me on the shoulder and told me in a friendly voice that it was good I had come, and that this would be a good chance to talk, really talk, about Mia's future. My father added that he was glad I was getting out a bit, and that it could not be healthy to spend every weekend alone or in the woods with just my daughter. I told them I was fine. They nodded in that careful way that said they did not believe me. The first hours went smoothly enough on the surface. The kids ran between the trees. My father showed Kevin the best place to hang the trash away from bears, as if Kevin had discovered camping that morning. Mia and I set up our tent. I drove the stakes in deep, checked the weather, felt the wind direction. The sky was clear, but nights in that forest dropped quick and cold. I knew that from many years of trips before anyone else in the family cared about the outdoors. When the tents were up and the fire ring was filled with dry wood, we gathered around the picnic table with sandwiches. That was when the real talk began. My mother started with small comments about school and how Mia would be starting middle school soon. Then she moved to money. She told Mia, with a laugh, that Uncle Kevin worked in an important office and that his company trusted him with big projects. She said that was why he had such a nice house and why his children had their own rooms and a big yard. She looked at me and added that of course there was nothing wrong with my small place, but it must be cramped, and that stress was not good for a man who had already been through so much. Kevin joined in, gently. He reminded everyone that he had told me I could move closer to him, maybe find a better job. He said he always had my back and that he wanted Mia to have all the chances in life. My father nodded and said a child needed stability and structure, and that it was hard for a single man with a modest paycheck to provide everything. They spoke as if I was not there. Mia sat next to me and picked at the crust of her sandwich. I focused on the pattern of ants moving near the table leg and took slow breaths. I had learned that getting loud never helped. It only made them say I was emotional or unstable, so I let them talk. That night around the fire, with other campers close enough to hear, Kevin told a story about a hike I had taken with Mia the year before. He changed the details. In his version, I had gotten us totally lost for hours and needed a stranger to guide us back. In reality, I had taken a long loop and misjudged the time by maybe 30 minutes. He made me sound like a man with no sense of direction, just wandering around the forest with a child until someone rescued us. My mother laughed too loudly and said this was why she worried. My father said it was a miracle, nothing bad had happened to us yet. Mia looked at me with hot, embarrassed eyes. I smiled at her and told her quietly that he was exaggerating. She knew it. She had been there. Still, the damage was done. Other people at the nearby sites had turned their heads. I could feel their eyes on me, measuring me, deciding who was competent and who was not. I went to sleep that night in our tent with the sounds of insects outside and the murmur of my parents' voices drifting over from their side of the site. They were talking about me. They always talked about me. I did not catch the words, but I knew the shape of the conversation. Worry, disappointment, plans. The next morning, the air was cold and clear. I woke up early and boiled water on the camp stove, making instant coffee for myself and hot chocolate for Mia. Kevin's family slept late. My parents stayed in their tent a long time. I watched the sun slip over the tree line and felt myself relax. Out here, away from their house, away from their living room full of Kevin's framed diplomas, I usually felt like I could breathe. After breakfast, I asked Mia if she wanted to take a short walk. Just a simple loop along the nearest trail, a path I knew well from old maps and from memory. She nodded at once. She liked those walks, just the two of us. No performance, no comparisons. I told my mother we were going to walk for a bit and that we would be back before lunch. She said I should not go far. She added a comment about not trusting my sense of direction. Kevin laughed. I said it was just a short loop. My father waved a hand in the air as if to dismiss the whole thing. Mia and I took one bottle of water each and some snacks in her small day pack. I checked the map at the trailhead out of habit, even though I already knew which turn we would take. The trail wound through tall pines and soft ground covered in needles. We walked and talked. I pointed out tracks of deer, the shape of certain leaves, the way the light changed when the wind moved the branches. Mia quizzed me on which way was north without looking at the sun. She got it right most of the time. We were gone maybe 40 minutes. I checked my watch twice. I am careful with time in the forest. When we turned back toward the campground, I felt calm and steady. I had the sense that the day could still go well if everyone stayed in a good mood. But when we stepped out of the trees and onto the little gravel road that led to our group site, the world had changed. From a distance, something felt wrong. The splash of color from the tents was missing. As we got closer, my chest tightened. There were no tents, no chairs, no coolers, no cars. The large spot where Kevin's SUV had been was just a flat area of dirt and dry grass. The fire ring was cold, emptied of ash. The only thing on the site was the wooden picnic table and the metal ring in front of it. Mia stopped walking. She asked where everyone went. Her voice was small and high. I did not answer right away. I walked forward, scanning the area like I was on a server room floor after a power surge. I looked for signs, tire tracks, footprints, any gear left behind. There was almost nothing. They had packed up completely. On the picnic table, a piece of paper lay under a gray stone. The wind tugged at one corner. I picked it up. It was from a small notebook my mother liked to keep on her kitchen counter. I recognized the paper and the handwriting at once. The message was short. The words were written fast. She had told me many things over the years, but nothing like this. The note said this was for the best and that I should trust her. My first reaction was simple confusion. I read it twice. For the best. Trust me. The words made no sense in the open air of the empty campsite. The silence around us felt heavy. No distant voice of my father, no kids shouting, no sound of Kevin's car door. Mia asked again where Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Kevin were. I told her I did not know yet. I said they must have gone somewhere, maybe to the ranger station, maybe into town. I walked to the end of the loop where the cars should have been parked. The road was empty. My own car was gone. So was Kevin's. So was my parents' sedan. I took my phone out and checked the screen. No signal. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the sky, the tops of the trees, the distant road. Nothing. Just the quiet of the forest and my daughter's breathing growing faster. I understood then, in a cold, almost mechanical way, what this meant. They had left us. They had taken all the food, all the heavy gear, and all the vehicles. They had left one small note on a bare table and driven away. They had done it not by accident, not because of confusion, but on purpose. The words on the paper were not from a panicked mind. They were from someone who thought this was a plan. My pulse quickened, but I forced my voice to stay level. I folded the note carefully and slid it into the zippered pocket of my jacket. I told Mia we were fine. I told her we had water, snacks, and my knife. I told her we knew where the fire road was and that there would be people on it eventually. I talked in simple, clear sentences, because that is what keeps fear from taking over. We spent the next hour setting up a small shelter with what we had, even though there was nothing left from the original camp. I showed Mia how to use a fallen branch and a tarp from her day pack to make shade. I made a list in my head of steps. Ration water, stay together, move toward the nearest road when the sun dropped a little. Survival is not magic. It is a series of small, boring decisions made on time. As the light began to change and the air turned cooler, Mia sat next to me on the ground, hugging her knees. The empty space where my family had been seemed even larger now. The burned circle of earth in the fire ring stared up like an eye. The wind moved through the trees with a slow whooshing sound. Mia looked up at me. Her eyes were shiny, but she was trying hard not to cry. She asked me, in a quiet voice, if Grandma had left us here on purpose. When she said it, something inside me did not explode. It just went still. When Mia asked if Grandma had left us on purpose, I felt that stillness spread through my chest like cold water. I told her we would talk about that later. I said right now we had to think about water and shelter and the sun. But her question did not come out of nowhere. A 10-year-old does not jump to that idea unless she has heard adults talk a certain way for a long time. My family had been worried about me for years. That was the word they liked. Worried. It sounded kind. It let them say cruel things and still see themselves as good people. After my marriage ended, their worry turned into a permanent background noise. At first, I thought it would fade. I thought they just needed to see that I could manage on my own. Instead, it became a story they repeated to anyone who would listen. I remember the first Sunday dinner at my parents' house after the divorce. Their house is bigger than mine, with soft carpets and framed photos all over the walls. Most of the frames hold pictures of Kevin at different ages, Kevin in a suit at graduation, Kevin holding a company award, Kevin standing in front of his new house. There are fewer photos of me. The ones of Mia usually include Kevin's kids too, like she cannot exist in a frame by herself. That evening, my mother had made roast chicken. We sat around the table. Mia was quiet, pushing peas around her plate. Kevin talked about a big project at work. He said his boss trusted him with a whole department now. My father smiled and said that was what he liked to hear, that real responsibility suited a man. Then my mother turned to me. She asked how the IT job was going. I said it was fine, steady. She said she wished I would aim higher because Mia would soon need more expensive things. School trips, sports, maybe private lessons. She added that it was hard enough for a girl to grow up with divorced parents, and it would be even harder if her father could not give her the same level of life as her cousins. She said it in a soft voice, like she was comforting me. My father nodded and said not everyone could be a high flyer like Kevin, but that I should at least consider moving closer to more opportunities. He used that phrase a lot, more opportunities. It always meant, be more like your brother. Kevin jumped in and said there were many jobs in his area, and that he knew people at some big firms. He said he could get my foot in the door if I ever wanted to step up from help desk work. He smiled as he said it. He thought he was being generous. I told them I appreciated the thought, but that I liked my job. I liked knowing the systems, the building, the people. I liked finishing at a set time so I could pick up Mia from school. My mother tilted her head and said she worried I had settled. The word fell between us like a little stone. Later that evening, when Mia was in the living room playing with her cousins, my mother pulled me into the kitchen. She stood with her hand on the counter and looked at me like a nurse checking a patient. She said I looked tired. She asked if I was coping. She reminded me that after the divorce I had spent a few months very quiet, and that she did not want me to go back to that dark place. I told her I was okay. I meant it. I was working, cooking, keeping the apartment clean, getting Mia to school on time. That was all real. My mother nodded slowly, but her eyes did not change. She told me that if anything ever happened, if I ever felt overwhelmed, Kevin and Laura would be ready to step in for Mia. She said they had space, money, and a strong marriage. She said it would not be a failure to admit I could not do it alone. That was the first time she said something like that directly. I remember feeling like someone had opened a window in winter. Cold air came in, and the room felt wrong. I told her I did not plan to stop being a father. She smiled and said, "Nobody plans to fall apart. It just happens." It did not matter how many days I got Mia to school early, or how many lunches I made, or how many evenings we spent doing homework at the kitchen table. Their image of me was stuck. Fragile, unstable. One bad week away from dropping everything. At Kevin's house, it was worse. He and Laura bought a big place in a newer neighborhood with clean sidewalks and tiny trees that still had tags on them. The living room was all pale colors and big windows. Laura loved to host people there and post photos of it online. She once joked that the house had to earn its keep by looking good in pictures. One summer, they invited us over for a barbecue. When we arrived, there was music playing, and people I did not know were already out in the yard. Kevin stood at the grill with an apron that said Grill King, He called out that he was glad I had made it. He said it would be good for me to be around normal energy again. Laura rushed up, kissed Mia on the cheek, and told her how much she had grown. Then she turned to me and asked if I could keep an eye on all the kids for a bit while she and Kevin handled the adults. She said it with a wink, like it was a fun joke. I ended up in the yard with 4 children running around, while the adults gathered around a cooler and talked about jobs, vacations, and school choices. Every time I tried to join the conversation, someone changed the subject or smiled politely and turned away. I overheard Laura telling one of her friends that I was good-hearted, but not exactly leadership material. She laughed when she said it. The friend laughed too. Later, when I was refilling Mia's cup in the kitchen, I heard my father in the next room. He was talking to a couple from the neighborhood. He told them that Kevin had always been strong and focused, that even when we were kids, he could see leadership in him. When he spoke about me, he lowered his voice a little. He said I was sensitive, that the divorce hit me hard, but that maybe, with the right support, I would get back on my feet. As if I was not already standing there, working and raising a child. My grandfather was the only one in the family who saw me differently, and he died before he could argue with them. He had owned a small cabin and a piece of land up near the forest. When I was a teenager, he took me hiking there. He showed me how to read the slope of a hill, how to listen for water, how to keep track of direction without a compass. He said the forest would never lie to me, not the way people sometimes did. When he got old, he wrote his will and set up a trust for the land and a small fund. He left that part to me, not to Kevin. My mother once told me that it made no sense because Kevin had a real family and I was just drifting. She said my grandfather had always been too sentimental. She called the conditions in the trust old-fashioned drama. I never read them carefully. I just knew the land and some money were for me and for Mia's future. At that time, I did not think anyone would ever try to use my child as a pawn. In the years after the divorce, I started taking Mia up to that area for short trips. We did not stay in the actual cabin much. It was in rough shape. But we walked near it. We camped at the public campground. I wanted her to know the woods, to know that she could look at a map and a sky and not panic. My parents thought it was strange. My father said soccer and group sports build character, not disappearing into the woods every few weekends. My mother said a girl needed malls, friends, and bright city lights, not dirt and bugs. When I tried to explain that Mia loved the trips, that they gave her confidence, my parents told me that I was forcing my weird, quiet hobbies on her because I could not handle real life. They did not come on those trips. They did not see the way her shoulders relaxed when we left town, or the way she walked straighter on the trail than she did in the school parking lot. They only saw the photos I sent, and even then they commented on the wrong things. My mother texted that Mia looked too thin in one picture, even though her pediatrician was happy with her growth. My father wrote that my beard made me look tired and wild. Slowly, the idea formed in their heads that they were the only stable piece in our lives. They told themselves they were the center, the rock. In their story, I was the loose part, the piece that might fall away. Then the group chat started to change. We have a family chat on our phones. At first, it was just for sharing photos of the kids and planning holidays. Over time, more of the messages were about me. Not always directly, but I could feel the shape of them. One day, my mother sent a long message saying she and my father had been talking and that they felt it was time to have an honest conversation about Mia's future. She wrote that middle school and high school would be make or break years. She wrote that, while she respected my love for my daughter, she was not sure I could give her all the experiences she deserved. Kevin replied with a thumbs-up emoji and wrote that they loved Mia like their own and would do whatever is best for her, even if it is hard. Laura added a heart and said their door was always open. I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to type many things. I wanted to ask them who had been packing lunches, walking to parent-teacher meetings, staying up with a sick child at 3 a.m. I wanted to remind them that Kevin traveled for work and that Laura often complained about being tired and wanting me time. In the end, I wrote something simple. I said Mia was my responsibility, that I was fine, and that we could talk about her school choices later. My mother replied with a sad face emoji and wrote that she was just worried. Always worried. When she suggested the camping weekend, she framed it as a peace offering. She said we could spend time together with no pressure and that it would be a good chance for everyone to relax and talk. She added a line that now rings in my head. She wrote that it might be our chance to see things clearly about what is best for Mia. I went anyway. Part of me hoped they would see us in the forest and understand. They would see Mia walking with a pack on her back, smiling, and know that we were okay. I thought maybe they would finally trust me. Now, standing at the empty campsite with that folded note in my pocket, I understood what she had meant in a different way. It was clear to them, all right. They had decided what was best. They had decided I was the problem that needed to be removed. As I knelt beside the small shelter Mia and I had built, pushing one last stake into the ground with a rock, my mind flicked back to that group chat. In my memory, I could see the exact line with my mother's message about seeing things clearly. I could see Kevin's thumbs up. I could see the date and time stamped above it. For a moment, I felt like my phone buzzed in my pocket. It did not, of course. There was no signal. It was just the ghost of that message, tapping at me from the past. The first night alone at the empty campsite was colder than the weather report said. When the sun slipped down behind the trees, the temperature dropped fast. The fire ring was empty, and all the wood we had gathered the day before was gone with the tents and chairs. I did not want to light a fire anyway, not yet. Smoke might signal someone, but it could also burn out quickly and leave us colder when we needed steady heat. We had Mia's little day pack, the clothes on our backs, my jacket, and a small emergency kit I always carried. It was not designed for a long stay, just for a bad afternoon. But that was what we had. I made a simple plan in my head. Night 1. Stay put, stay warm, do not panic. Morning. Move toward the fire road I knew ran behind the campground, then follow it until we reached a ranger station or at least a place with a signal. I did not tell Mia the whole plan. A child does not need the full weight of the problem. She needs the next step. We cleared a small flat space under a thick pine tree and laid down my jacket and her hoodie as padding. I showed her how to tuck leaves and pine needles around the edges to block the wind. We huddled close, her back to my chest, my arms around her like another layer of clothing. She shivered for a while, then her breathing slowed. I could tell she was not fully asleep, but she was resting. I watched the stars through the branches and went over our supplies again and again in my mind. Half a bottle of water each, a handful of trail mix, a few small bars, my pocket knife, a mini flashlight. The note in my jacket pocket folded into a small sharp square. Every time I thought of the note, my jaw clenched. I forced myself to relax it. Tight muscles waste energy and make you feel weaker. I had to stay calm. That was the only way we were going to walk out of this. Sometime in the middle of the night, Mia whispered that her feet were cold. I took my socks off and pulled them over her smaller socks. My toes went numb, but her body relaxed. That was good enough. When the sky started to grow pale and the first birds made soft, curious sounds, I shook her awake gently. Her face was pale and her hair was full of pine needles. I told her we had made it through the first night. That was a win. We shared a small breakfast, a few pieces of trail mix each, a mouthful of water, held in the mouth for a moment before swallowing. I explained why we had to ration. I did not hide the truth. I just framed it in tasks, not in fear. Then we walked. I led her along the path toward the back of the campground, away from the entrance road. Most people come in from the front. They do not think about the fire roads that snake along the hills behind. But I had walked those roads with my grandfather years before, and I had studied satellite images on my laptop when planning trips. The trail was clear at first. Then it narrowed, branches reaching in. I kept Mia in front of me so I could see every step she took. We moved slowly. The forest was beautiful, if you looked only with your eyes. The sun made bright patches on the ground. Birds called across the gaps. But there was no human sound, no engines, no voices. When we stopped to catch our breath, Mia asked again why they had left. Her voice had less anger in it now, and more confusion. I told her that sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices and try to cover them with pretty words. I told her that whatever reason they give later, leaving a child on purpose is wrong. Full stop. She asked if I thought they would be in trouble. I said I did not know yet. I said first we had to get safe. Then we would see. We walked most of that day, with breaks in the shade. I watched the angle of the sun and the shapes of the hills, checking my internal compass against what I remembered from the map. Once or twice, I doubted myself and felt a wave of fear rise up, but I pushed it down and replaced it with numbers. Steps, minutes, distances. In the late afternoon, the trail opened onto a wider dirt track. The fire road, 2 ruts with short grass down the middle. I stood there for a moment and let myself feel one small piece of relief. We were on a path somebody used with vehicles. That was better than the deep woods. We slept another night just off that road, under another tree. It was harder. Mia was more tired, and hunger made her irritable. My own legs ached, but I did not say so. I told her stories about my grandfather to distract her. I told her about the time he lost his hat in a stream and laughed instead of getting angry. She asked if I missed him. I said I did, especially now. On the 3rd day, sometime around midday, we heard an engine. At first, it was just a faint hum under the sound of wind. Then it grew louder. I stepped into the middle of the fire road and waved both arms high. A white truck came around a bend, tires crunching over stones. It had a county logo on the side and a light bar on top. The driver hit the brakes. A ranger jumped out, eyes wide. He spoke fast into his radio, saying he had found us. Another voice crackled back through the speaker, full of noise. I caught words like search, 3 days, and copy that. Mia started crying then, all at once, like her body had been holding it in for as long as it could. The ranger gave her a blanket from the back seat and a bottle of water, telling her to sip slowly. He looked at me and said we were lucky. He said our family was frantic and that they had been looking everywhere. I did not answer right away. I just looked at him. My brain felt like someone had thrown 2 different movies on the same screen. One movie was me standing at the empty campsite with that note. The other was this man talking about how worried my family was. At the ranger station, things moved quickly. People in uniforms asked questions. Another truck took Mia and me there, and someone checked our vitals. My head was light from hunger and the sudden presence of too many people. A woman with a clipboard asked me to walk through what happened. I told her we had gone for a short walk. I told her we came back and everyone was gone. I told her there was a note. When I got to that part, she looked up sharply. "A note?" she said. "Yes," I said. "From my mother, on the picnic table." She wrote something down. Then she asked me if I still had it. I patted my jacket and realized they had given me a station hoodie while my clothes were checked. My jacket, with the note in it, was hanging on a hook near the door. I told her it was there. Someone brought it over. I reached into the pocket myself and pulled the folded paper out. For a moment, I just held it between my fingers. Part of me wanted to tear it in half. Another part wanted to burn it. Instead, I handed it to the woman. She read it, and her eyebrows drew together. She did not say anything, but she passed it to another person in a uniform, a deputy with a badge on her chest. The deputy looked at it and then at me. "What time did you find this?" she asked. I told her as best I could. I gave her the day, the approximate hour. I said we had been gone maybe 40 minutes before that, and that I had checked my watch when we left and when we returned. She wrote it all down. Later, at the small local hospital, I saw my parents again. They were in the waiting area outside the examination room where Mia was being checked for dehydration and exposure. My mother's eyes were red. My father looked older than he had 3 days earlier. Kevin and Laura were there too, in clean clothes, holding coffee cups. The moment my mother saw me, she rushed forward and wrapped her arms around me. She cried into my shoulder and said she had been so scared. She said she had not slept. She said when we had run off like that, they had known something was wrong. I let her hug me. My arms stayed at my sides. When she stepped back, she started talking fast. She said she had told the police that I had been acting strange, that I had taken Mia on long, unsafe hikes before, that she had begged me not to go so far this time. She said they had called 911 not long after I disappeared, but that the signal was bad, and it took a while to get through. Kevin added his own version. He told a reporter who had appeared in the hallway that we had stormed off after an argument about safety and that they had tried to stop me. His tone was calm and serious. He said they were just grateful the search teams had done such a good job. I stood there listening. It was like watching someone re-edit a film you had lived in. They talked about my breakdown and my history of depression. They used words I had heard them use before, in living rooms and in kitchen corners. Now those words were in a hospital corridor, aimed at strangers with notebooks and cameras. They thought they were building a case for how noble they were. When I tried to speak, my mother put her hand on my arm and told me not to worry about the details right now, that the important thing was that Mia was safe. Her fingers squeezed just a little too tight. It felt like a warning. A nurse called me into the examination room. Mia was sitting on the bed, feet dangling. Her face was tired, but her eyes were clear. She smiled when she saw me. The doctor said she was dehydrated and exhausted, but stable. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation. While Mia rested, the deputy from the ranger station came in. Her name tag said Ruiz. She asked if she could talk to me in a small side room. We sat across from each other at a metal table. There was a stack of forms in front of her. She asked me again to tell her what had happened, this time from the start of the camping trip. I told her about the arrival, the comments, the walk, the note, the nights on the fire road. I did not add emotion. I gave her times and actions. She listened without interrupting, tapping her pen lightly on the table. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "Your parents and your brother gave us a different version," she said. "They said you were upset, that you refused to listen to them about safety, and that you took your daughter deep into the woods without telling anyone where you were going." "That's not true," I said. She nodded again. "I noticed," she said. "They didn't mention any note." I looked at her. For the first time since we were found, someone had said something that matched the shape of reality in my head. She slid a photocopy of the note across the table. The original was in a clear plastic sleeve now, marked with a small label. She said they would keep the original in their file and that she wanted to attach my statement to it. "Do you still have your watch?" she asked. "The one you used to check the time?" I told her I did. She asked if I would be willing to let them download the activity data later, just to compare times with the 911 records and the call logs. I agreed. It made sense. Then she looked me in the eye in a way that felt less like an officer and more like a person. "Mr. Novak," she said, "I can't tell you what will happen next. That's not my role. But I'm going to write exactly what you told me, and I'm going to include the note. The timeline matters here." Her words landed like small, steady stones, building something inside me. Up until that point, a part of me had still been hoping this was some awful misunderstanding, that my parents had panicked and driven up the road to look for us and gotten stuck, that something outside their control had made them leave, that the story they were telling themselves had some truth in it. Sitting across from Officer Ruiz, with the copy of the note between us, I let that last piece of hope go. What was left was not anger, not yet. It was something cleaner. A hard, quiet line. I realized that if I let them control the story now, they would do it for the rest of Mia's life. They would tell her that her father was unstable, that they had saved her from him, that the forest trip was proof. They would use this event like a tool. I could not allow that. I did not raise my voice. I did not pound the table. I just sat a little straighter in my chair and answered every one of Officer Ruiz's follow-up questions with even more detail. At the end of the interview, she gathered the papers into a neat stack. Then she paused and looked at my jacket, hanging on the back of the chair. "Do you still have the note on you?" she asked. I reached into the pocket and felt the empty space where it had been. Then I remembered the plastic sleeve. The original was with them now. "I have what's left of it," I said. She nodded. "We'll need to make sure all copies are clear," she said. "Every word matters." She slid the plastic sleeve across the table so I could see it one more time. The letters were as sharp and familiar as the lines of my own hand. "I'm going to need to make another copy for the file," she added, standing up. As she walked toward the door with the note in her hand, I knew, with that same cold stillness from the campsite, that I was done just absorbing their version of me. After the hospital let Mia go home, the house felt smaller than before. We came back with a hospital bracelet still on her wrist and a packet of discharge papers in my hand. Mia went straight to the couch and curled up with a blanket. I made her toast and soup, even though she said she was not very hungry. I wanted to put warm, simple food between her and what had just happened. She fell asleep with the bowl half finished on the coffee table. I moved it away and watched her for a while. Her hair lay across the pillow in a messy line. Her cheeks were less pale now. The quiet in the room was heavy but different from the quiet in the forest. This quiet held questions. My phone buzzed more than once that evening. Messages from my mother. Messages from Kevin. Short, sharp lines about how glad they were we were safe. Mixed into those lines were comments about being on the same page for the investigators and about the story we needed to tell so nobody got into trouble. I did not answer right away. I moved the phone to the kitchen counter and left it there. Instead, I took a small notebook and a pen from the drawer and sat at the dining table. I wrote the word timeline at the top of the page. Then I started to list everything, from the moment we arrived at the campground to the moment the ranger's truck stopped on the fire road. I wrote like I was filling out a server incident report at work. Date, time, action. No adjectives, just facts. Arrival, remarks at the picnic table, story at the campfire, morning walk, note on table, decision to stay the first night. Distance walked each day. Exact words from the ranger. Statements at the hospital. As I wrote, small details came back. The tone my mother used when she talked about seeing things clearly. The way my father had waved his hand when I said we would be back by lunch. Kevin's face when he told the reporter I had stormed off. I wrote those too, in simple sentences. By the time I finished, 2 hours had passed. My neck hurt from bending over the page. I flipped back through the notes and realized this was the first time I had laid all of it out in one place. It looked less like bad luck and more like a sequence. The next day, Officer Ruiz called. Her voice on the phone was calm. She said they were finalizing the initial report and needed me to come by the station to sign my statement. She also said I could, if I wished, ask later for copies of certain things, like the incident report and the 911 call logs. She explained that it was my right as an involved party. I thanked her. She sounded surprised for a second, then said she was only doing her job. At the ranger station, the air smelled like coffee and dust. The walls had maps and missing person posters tacked up on bulletin boards. Ruiz sat with me at a desk and slid a printed version of my statement across. The lines looked like my words, just more formal. She asked me to read it and tell her if anything was wrong. I read each line slowly. The times were as close as my memory could make them. The description of the note was exact. I signed at the end. As I stood to leave, she reminded me that the original note was now part of their file. She said they had made clear copies for the case. She did not say much more, but she gave me a look that said she knew this was not just about a camping trip. On the way home, I stopped by a small office supply store. I bought a pack of cheap folders in different colors and a stack of sticky labels. The clerk did not say much. It was just another sale. For me, it felt like picking up tools. Back at the apartment, Mia was watching a cartoon. I sat at the kitchen table again and set up the folders. One for the hospital, one for the ranger station, one for my own timeline notes, one empty, labeled in small letters with the word phone. I did not know yet what would go into that last one. I just knew there would be something. A day later, an old friend called me. His name was Sam. We had worked together at a previous job, and he had moved into project management later while I stayed in support. We had kept in touch loosely. He had seen a local news clip about the lost father and daughter rescued after 3 days, and had guessed it was me. He did not ask many questions over the phone. He just said he knew a lawyer who handled family and civil cases and who was not afraid of messy stories. He said he had already texted her my number if I wanted to talk to her. That was how I ended up sitting in a small office on the second floor of a building near the courthouse facing Priya Desai. Her office was not big, but it was orderly. There were shelves with binders, a framed certificate on the wall, and a printer in the corner with a neat stack of paper beside it. The window looked down on a busy street. Cars moved slowly, and people walked past carrying coffees and briefcases. Priya asked me to start at the beginning. She did not rush me. She took notes on a legal pad while I spoke. I told her everything I had told Officer Ruiz, and then I told her everything before that. The dinners, the comments, the group chat, the trust my grandfather had set up. When I mentioned the trust, she looked up. She asked a few careful questions about it. Who set it up? When? Who the trustee was? Who the named beneficiaries were supposed to be? I answered as best I could. I admitted I had never read the full document, and that my mother had always brushed it off as drama. Priya tapped her pen on the pad. She said it sounded like something worth pulling and reading properly. She also said that what happened at the campground, if it matched my account and the note, went far beyond a family argument. She used terms like child endangerment and false statements, but she did not oversell. She said the system was slow and imperfect, yet it did pay attention to patterns and evidence. She told me we would need to collect things piece by piece. She mentioned the hospital records, the police report, any texts or voicemails that suggested a plan. She said to keep everything, even small messages, and not to delete anything, no matter how much it hurt to read. As she spoke, the printer in the corner started up. A quiet whir, then the soft slap of pages dropping into the tray. She did not say what was printing. She just stood up, grabbed the stack, and clipped it to a file with my name on it. Sitting there, listening to that printer, I felt something shift. It was the sound of my side of the story turning into paper. Not just memory, not just feelings, but lines of text that would sit in a folder in someone else's office. When I left, Priya gave me a short list on a sticky note. It had simple tasks: request copies of hospital records, backup phone messages, send her any photos or screenshots related to the trip, find contact information for whoever managed my grandfather's trust. She said we would not rush into anything dramatic. First, we would gather. Then we would see what structures were already in place that could be used. She said that in her experience, it was better to work with the systems people believed in than to try to fight outside them. Her calm tone matched the way I had felt in the forest when I broke our survival down into small tasks. It made sense to me. On the way home from her office, I drove past my parents' house. I told myself I was not going to stop. I told myself I was just taking that street out of habit. But when I saw my father's car in the driveway and my mother's flowers along the front walk, I found my hands turning the wheel. I parked on the street and sat for a minute, engine off. My heart beat faster, but my mind stayed clear. I knew I had to pick up some of Mia's things eventually, and part of me wanted to see how they would behave now that there were police reports and hospital notes between us. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She must have seen my car from the front window. Her face rearranged itself into concern as she stepped aside and told me to come in. Inside, the house looked the same as always: the framed photos, the neat couch, the smell of cleaning products. My father sat in his armchair. The television was on, volume low, showing some talk show. My mother started talking almost at once. She said I looked thin. She said she had been worried sick. She said the police questions were stressful for everyone and that the sooner we presented a united front, the better. She repeated that what happened at the campground was a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. Then her voice changed. She said she had heard I had spoken to a lawyer. She did not ask. She stated it. She said she could not believe I would bring strangers into family matters. She said it would only make me look unstable if I made a lot of noise. She told me, in a tight tone, that if I loved Mia, I would think carefully about how my actions would appear to a judge. My father added a few words from his chair. He said nobody wanted to take Mia away from me permanently. He said they were just trying to create a plan that kept her safe. He said my trips to the woods made them nervous, and that, after what had happened, people could easily see me as careless. He said it would be better if I agreed to some kind of arrangement now, before others forced one on me. I listened. I did not argue. I watched their faces, the way their eyes slid away when they said certain things. I realized they were not just worried about Mia. They were worried about themselves. They knew, at some level, that they had crossed a line. I told them, in a flat voice, that I had come to pick up some of Mia's clothes and school books. My mother tried to keep the conversation going, tried to bring up the camping trip again, but I repeated my request. She finally went upstairs and came back with a bag. As I left, she put a hand on my arm and said she hoped I would not make this worse than it already is. She said she was still my mother and knew what was best. I stepped back and said I would handle things properly. I used that word on purpose. Back home, I put the bag down by Mia's room and sat at the kitchen table again. I took my phone out and opened our family group chat. I scrolled back to the message where my mother had written about the camping weekend being a chance to see things clearly and to talk about what was best for Mia. I took a screenshot. Then I took screenshots of Kevin's reply and Laura's little heart reaction. I moved those images into a separate folder on my phone. Then I plugged the phone into my computer and copied them onto a USB drive I had labeled months ago for photos. I pressed a fresh label over the old one and wrote, in small letters, Family Camp. I slipped that USB drive into the empty folder I had labeled Phone. The folder was not empty anymore. It was thin, but it had weight. That evening, while Mia did her homework at the coffee table, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The screen showed a local area code and a generic label. I answered. The man on the other end introduced himself as Tom Becker from Child Protective Services. He said our names, mine and Mia's, and said a report had been filed after the forest incident. He told me they wanted to schedule a family case conference to discuss concerns from my parents and my brother about my patterns of behavior. He said it in a neutral voice, like he was reading from a script. I wrote his name on a sticky note and the date and time of the call. When I hung up, I put the sticky note on the folder that now held the USB drive. In the quiet that followed, the fridge hummed and the street outside stayed dull and gray. Mia looked up from her homework and asked who had called. I told her it was someone who wanted to talk to the adults about what had happened. She asked if we were in trouble. I looked at the folders on the table, at the neat labels in blue pen, and at the sticky note with Tom's name. I told her we were going to tell the truth to the people whose job it was to listen. The CPS office was in a plain building that could have been anything from the outside. Gray walls, small windows, a row of parking spaces that were all the same. Inside, the air smelled like paper and hand sanitizer. There were posters on the walls about children's rights and safe homes. The chairs in the waiting area were hard and close together. Mia sat next to me, holding my hand. My parents sat on the other side of the room. Kevin and Laura were beside them. Nobody spoke. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue even though she was not crying. A door opened and a man in a shirt and tie stepped out. He had a folder in his hand and a name badge that said Becker. He greeted us one by one in the same calm tone. He said he would talk to everybody today. He said it was just to understand what happened and to make sure Mia was safe. He did not raise his voice. He did not take sides in his words. His face was polite but unreadable. He asked to speak with me first. The interview room was small, with a table and 2 chairs. There was a box of tissues on the corner of the table and a plastic cup of pens. A faint buzzing sound came from the ceiling light. Tom sat across from me and opened the folder. He asked me to confirm my full name and Mia's. Then he asked me to describe the camping trip, starting from the moment we left my apartment. I had told the story many times by then, but this time felt different. There was no uniform, no hospital bed, no background noise of beeping machines. Just a man with a pen and a form. I spoke slowly. I gave him times and actions, like I had done for Officer Ruiz. I described the ride up, the comments at the picnic table, the story at the fire, the short walk, the empty campsite, the note, the nights on the fire road, the rescue, the hospital hallway. He took notes and sometimes asked me to repeat a detail or to be more specific. When I mentioned the note, his pen paused. He asked what it said. I told him. He wrote the words down. He asked if I had ever gotten lost with Mia before. I said no. I said we had once taken a longer loop than planned and come back after dark, but we had never been lost. He asked if I had any history of mental illness or breakdowns. I told him I had been sad after my divorce and had gone to therapy for a while, but that I had never stopped working, never stopped taking care of my daughter. He listened, he did not comment. At one point, he looked up and asked a different kind of question. He asked how Mia usually did in school, what her teachers said, what life at home was like on a normal week. I told him about homework, dinners at the small table, weekend walks, our little rituals. I did not try to make us look perfect. I just described us as we were. When he finished his questions, he closed the folder and thanked me. He said he would now talk to Mia alone, and then to my parents, and to Kevin and Laura. He asked if I was comfortable with Mia speaking to him without me in the room. I said yes. I wanted her to feel free to say whatever she needed to say. In the waiting room, Mia looked nervous when he called her name, but she stood up. I told her it was okay, and that she just had to tell the truth, even if it made some adults look bad. She nodded. She went into the room, and the door closed. I sat alone in the waiting area. My parents watched me from across the room. My mother's eyes were sharp now behind the glassy surface. My father's mouth was a thin line. Kevin looked at his phone. Laura whispered something to him and gave a tiny, tight smile. After a while, the door opened again. Mia came out, eyes a little red, but shoulders straight. She went back to her seat and squeezed my hand. She did not say what she had told Tom. I did not ask. I knew I would hear his version later. Then it was my mother's turn. She stood up slowly, like she was the victim in all this, and went into the room with Tom. The door closed behind her. I watched the clock on the wall. Minutes ticked by. Mia leaned against me and drew little shapes on the side of my hand with her finger. Kevin and Laura talked in low voices with my father. Once my mother's voice rose behind the closed door, then dropped again. I could not hear the words. When she came out, she had that same hurt look she wore at family arguments. My father went in next, then Kevin and Laura. Each time, the door closed and opened, and they came out with carefully chosen expressions as if they were acting for a small audience. At one point, when it was quiet, I noticed a small moment that meant more than it seemed. Mia had gone to the bathroom with my mother, who insisted on taking her. I stayed in my chair. When they came back down the hall, my mother was bent over, speaking softly to her. Her face was close to Mia's ear. From where I sat, I could not hear the words, but I saw the tension in Mia's shoulders. Tom stepped out of another office just then and stopped. He watched them for a few seconds. Then his expression changed slightly. He did not say anything right away. He just waited until they reached the waiting room, then made a note on the folder in his hand. The conference ended with Tom sitting down with all the adults together while Mia colored on a clipboard at a side table. He said there were conflicting accounts of what had happened at the campground. He said there would need to be a formal recommendation to the court. He said Mia had spoken well and that her description matched the basic timeline of the official reports. My mother jumped in and said she hoped the recommendation would recognize that they had always been Mia's safety net. My father added something about my pattern of isolation and risky outings. Kevin spoke about his stable home and resources. Laura talked about structure and social life. Tom listened. When they were done, he said he could not share the contents of his report yet. He reminded everyone that the goal was Mia's safety, not anyone's feelings. He said any next steps would go through family court. On the way home, Mia was quiet. She stared out the car window and watched the buildings go by. At a red light, she asked if Grandma was mad at her. I told her I did not know what my mother felt, but that if Grandma was upset because Mia told the truth, that was Grandma's responsibility, not hers. Mia nodded slowly. Her reflection in the glass looked older than 10 for a moment. That evening, I met Priya at the coffee shop near the courthouse. It was a small place with worn wooden tables and a chalkboard menu. People worked on laptops or talked in low voices. The smell of coffee and baked things made the room feel warmer than it was outside. I brought my folders and the USB drive in my bag. Priya came in with her briefcase and a scarf wrapped around her neck. She ordered tea, I ordered coffee, and we sat at a table by the window. I handed her the sticky note with Tom's name and the date of the conference. I told her what had happened, what he asked, what I saw. I told her about the moment in the hallway with my mother leaning down to whisper to Mia and Tom watching. She wrote notes as I spoke. Then I slid the USB drive across the table. I told her it held screenshots of the group chat, including my mother's message about the camping weekend being a chance to see things clearly, and Kevin's line about doing what's best for Mia, even if Alex doesn't like it. She took the drive and put it in a small padded pocket in her briefcase. Then I gave her copies of the hospital papers and the ranger station notes I had requested. Each paper made a small sound when it hit the table. Together, they made a stack. Priya looked at the pile for a moment, then said she would request the official incident report and the 911 call logs next. She said those would be important. She also said she had already reached out to the bank that handled my grandfather's trust. They were sending over copies of the trust document and any related notes. She did not tell me what was in it yet. She said she wanted to read it carefully first and then talk to me. I agreed. I did not need the details that second. I just needed to know someone was reading it who was on my side. We went over a simple, clear timeline again. She drew boxes on a sheet of paper. Before trip, at camp, after rescue. Under each, she wrote short bullet points. I corrected a couple of times. She adjusted the words. It was like debugging a system diagram. Clean lines, clear labels. At the end, she circled the words court hearing and looked up at me. There will be one, she said. Tom's report, the police report, the hospital records, they all point in that direction. Your parents and your brother have put things in motion they may not fully understand. She said we would not go looking for a fight, but we would not run from one either. She said our goal was simple: keep Mia safe, tell the truth, and make sure nobody could rewrite this event as proof of my instability. A few days later, her prediction became real. I was at home helping Mia with a science worksheet when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Priya's name. I stepped into the kitchen and answered. Her voice was calm as always, but there was an extra weight under it. She told me the court had set a date for a combined custody review and protective order hearing. She gave me the time and the courtroom number. She said Tom's report had gone in, along with a request from my parents' lawyer to clarify custody and safety arrangements after the forest incident. She did not go into detail about the filings yet. She said we would meet to prepare. She told me to keep doing what I was doing, live quietly, keep records, do nothing that could be spun as reckless. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long minute, feeling the cool floor under my feet. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. Her message was short. She wrote that she had heard about the hearing and that it was not too late to come to an agreement as a family so the judge would see us as united. She suggested a plan where Mia would live with Kevin's family during the school week and see me on weekends. Supervised at first, just to ease concerns. She wrote that if I agreed to something like that, they would tell the judge I was cooperating and that there was no need for extreme measures. She ended the message with a line saying I should think about what was best for Mia, not my pride. I read it twice, then I put the phone down on the counter without replying. Later that night, after Mia had gone to bed, my mother called. Her voice on the phone was tight and soft, the way it got when she was angry but trying not to sound angry. She repeated the offer. She said lawyers would only make things ugly. She said the judge would listen to her and to Kevin because they looked stable and I did not. She said if I pushed this, I could lose everything. I let her talk. When she paused, I said in a flat voice that I would handle things the proper way. I said there were systems for this, and I trusted them more than I trusted family at the moment. There was a silence on the line, then a sharp breath. She said I was making a mistake. I said we would see. We ended the call. In the days before the hearing, Priya and I met twice more at her office. We did not spread documents around in front of me. She kept most of the papers in her folders. She told me in broad strokes what she would focus on: the timeline, the note, the risk to Mia, the pattern of their words. She said not to worry about legal phrases, or that was her job. My job was to be clear, calm, and steady, to answer questions without guessing, to say I don't know when I did not know, and I don't remember when I did not remember, instead of trying to fill gaps. To let the record speak where my memory might be attacked. She also told me, almost as an aside, that the trust documents were interesting. She said my grandfather had been very specific about certain conditions and that those conditions might have more weight now than anyone expected. She did not say more. I let that sit in the back of my mind like a sealed envelope. On the morning of the hearing, I ironed my one good shirt and pulled on the least worn pair of dress pants I owned. Mia wore a simple dress and a cardigan. We ate a quiet breakfast. My hands shook once when I poured coffee, but they were steady by the time we left. Outside the courthouse, the air was cool and smelled faintly of exhaust. The building rose above us, heavy and square. People moved in and out through the glass doors, some in suits, some in jeans. We went through security, put our keys and phones in plastic trays, walked through the metal detector. The guard on the other side handed everything back and pointed us toward the elevators. In the elevator, Mia held my hand. The numbers above the door lit up. 2, 3, 4. At the 5th floor, the doors opened. The hallway was lined with benches and wooden doors with small plaques. Priya was waiting near one of them, papers in a slim folder under her arm. She greeted us, smiled at Mia, then nodded at me. Her eyes were serious. A few benches down, my parents sat with Kevin and Laura. They were dressed like they were going to church. Next to them sat a woman in a dark suit with a briefcase at her feet. Their lawyer. As we stepped into the hallway, the courtroom door beside Priya opened. A clerk leaned out and called my last name. My parents' lawyer went first, painting me as unstable, obsessed with the woods. I let it wash over me. Then Priya stood. She handed up the sheriff's report, the 911 logs, the hospital records. She put the note on the screen. "This is for the best. Trust me." She walked the judge through my watch GPS, the timestamps, the texts about shifting Mia to Kevin. Tom Becker confirmed Mia's story. Last, Priya filed my grandfather's trust notice, cutting them off the land forever. The judge signed custody and protective orders. The clerk's stamp cracked the room. I walked out silently.